Cheers. Begin the current Daf, Mesech Beya, Daf Chaf. Begin 5 lines down the top of the Yamin. We will continue with the halacha of a previous Daf, which we were discussing, bringing the Durham and the Davis on Yom Tov, where the Machlekes, in the opinion of Beisil, Tanakama, Abashal, if you can bring the Durham and the Davis on Yom Tov. The second more continues on related questions. Shiz correspond because of the Cheskel to Anindam Dafachem, B'Shem is joining us for today's Daf. Something we're going to discuss in today's Daf, as we mentioned, are animals jointly owned by a Jew and a non-Jew. May they be slaughtered on Yom Tov, which we're going to compare it to see if that's similar to the halacha of the Dharma and the Davis on Yom Tov. Regarding a similar case of animals is regarding dough that's jointly owned by a Jew and a non-Jew, or designated partially for animal fodder animal fodder and human consumption, which is going to be what we call isis kalavim. Could that be baked on Yom Tov? Those are going to be similar questions regarding, again, things that are somewhat for you and somewhat not for you. Regarding insulating hot water on Yom Tov for Shabbos, when is it permissible? The halacha of Tmana, and 3 halachas in which Gamaliel acted stringently like Beis Shammai. So the key terms of concept we're discussing today's daf are isis klavim, which is the dough it was used with the chaff, with the bran, and into the dough, and therefore was given for the dogs, but it is able to be eaten by a human. Hence, it could have different halachas. Challah is the halacha that when one bakes dough, they has to separate a certain portion and give it to the kohanim. Tzeiros is, in Talmudic times, their homes open up into common courtyards. So although midaraisa it's not a Rosh Hashanah, but since it's similar to that, one has to go ahead and take a bread together from everybody and put it in someone's house. It's like as if everyone's living in that house. Kriyat Shurei is the halacha that although certain things are muktzeh, not allowed to move it, but if it's disgusting, it's repulsive, it's a bucket of excrement, so then you're allowed to go ahead and move that. And tzarich echol nefesh is the halacha lunat from the pasuk achar she'achol echol nefesh hu levad b'yos lechem, is that if something is for a human consumption, it's permitted to be done on Yom Tov. So begin the current daf. We said that echol nefesh, we said that a person is allowed to go ahead and make it in Yom Tov, but there are some exceptions, as we said in the previous daf. It says hu levad b'yos lechem. They told us that lechem means b'v'lo l'kutim, it's for you can make echol nefesh, but not for kutim, and also b'lo l'klavim, you can't do it for dogs. So on that theme is where the Gemara continues with the related question. Boi menei Rav Avi Yisav ben Rav Huna says, what's if you have a behema? You have an animal, chetza shel nachri, v'chetza shel Yisrael. Half is owned by, it's a partnership, they bought this animal together, half owned by a non-Jew, half owned by a Jew. What's the halacha? Can you shecht such an animal on Yom Tov? So Malay Mutter says, you're allowed to shecht such an animal on Yom Tov. So Malay said to him, how is this any different than Nedarim and Nedavis? Which, as Rashi points out, the interesting comparison, a Ned and a Nedava is really half for you, half for Hashem. Hashem gets some of the parts on the Mizbech, and you get some of them. It's a shlamim. And yet you're not allowed to shecht it, because it's not all going to the person. So what's the difference? Why are you saying when it's half owned by a Jew, half owned by a non-Jew, the non-Jew's part, you're not allowed to do, it's lachem v'lo l'nachem, v'lo l'kutim. So what's the difference? So Malay said to him, Urva parach, a raven is flying on top, which basically he was distracting him to something else. So Kinafa, when Rav Avia left, Amalei Rabba Berei, Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said to his father, Rav Huna, Lav Hainu Rav Avia Savi, isn't this Rav Avia the elder? That the master, you said how great he is? The Gavar Rabba, who is it, the big Talmid Chacham? So why did you push him away? Why did he leave like embarrassing, like as if like, oh look, there's a plane flying on top. Why didn't you answer him? So Malay said to him, Uma'a Evedle, he says, what should I do for him? Ani hayoim, I am today, which it was Yom Tov, and he gave drushes for many people, and he was feeling weak from all the drushes he put in. And he says, regarding me, you can recite to me the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Samchuni ba'ashisha, support me with cakes, Ravduni b'tapuchim, spread out for me the apples, meaning bring for me a meal and I'll eat. He says, because I'm exhausted. He asked me something that needs reasoning and explanation, and I said, I have to think and I have to analyze it. I couldn't think, so I just distracted him. But it's not because I disrespected him, it's just because I simply didn't have any more koyches. So the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, okay, but tell me mine. Taka, it's a good question. That Rav Avi had asked him, what's the nafkamin? What's the difference between half Jew, half non-Jew, or half Hashem and half Jew? Either one, you're not allowed to do. Says the Gemara like this: Behema, when you have an animal, half owned by a Jew, half owned by a non-Jew, the reason why it's mutal shach b'yom tiv, la shech on yom tiv, is because the actually kazayis basav leishchita. What happens is like this: you want to eat an animal, but you only want to eat a kazayis, a gross key, big fat cow. You want to eat just an olive-sized piece of meat. Now you don't have to eat the whole thing, but you could do the shchita on yom tiv if you want to go ahead and eat that kazayis, because you can't eat even the kazayis part unless you shech the whole animal. So therefore, although the other half is owned by a non-Jew, I own half the animal. I own more than the kazayis and meat. I could check it. I'm the darm and the dove is asla shach b'yom tiv. You know why? Why can't you check? Why is not the same thing? Half is for me, half is for Hashem. No, it's not. Because the svar is the kehanim tikazachu. When the kehanim, when they get their portions, mishulchan gavaya kazachu. When they get their breast and the thigh of the animal, and so too says Rashi, something for the owner for the rest of the meat, it's like a servant taking a portion from his master. Comes out really all of the shchitas for Hashem. You're doing it for Hashem. Hashem's then sharing shirayim. Did ever get those shirayim and giving out to the kahanim and to the bailam? But it's all for Hashem. Therefore, that's why it's different, and therefore it's going to be asur. A similar case says the Gemara that Amar Rav Chizda, he says behema shechetzi shel nachi v'chetzi shel yisrael. If you have an animal that's half Jews and half non-Jews, that the halacha is mutal l'shachta b'yom tiv. You're allowed to shecht it, as we said on yom tiv, because the actually kazayis basal l'shchit. We just said this idea because you can't go ahead and eat a kazayis without slaughtering. Now, but he gives a contrast over here. He says isa, but let's say you have a dough. You have two guys. You have a butcher and a baker. Different halachas. The butcher is Simon and whatever some Gershon name, and then you have the baker. Also, he has a non-Jewish partner. Here it's different. It's half Jewish and half not Jewish. That you can't bake on Yom Tov. You know why? Because the efshalei lamifli belisha. You could when you don't have to do b'shchita to slaughter the whole animal. You can't just cut off the feet and shech the foot to shech the whole animal. Here you could separate when you needed the dough. You don't have to bake the non-Jewish part. However, Masav Rav Chana Bar Chanilo, he asked from a Mishnah Masechet Chala. The Mishnah says, Isa's klovim, the dough of dogs, meaning it's dough that was inferior, that would mix in a lot of bran and all the chaff, and you give it for the dogs. Now, but at the time that the shepherds who are watching over the animals, if they eat from that dough, chayeves b'chala. So first of all, it's going to be obligated in chala because it's called lechem. It's called bread because people are going to eat it, and therefore you have to separate chala for give to the kohen. Uma arvin ba, and also you're going to have the halacha of making eruv b'chatzeres with it, which is to carry from one's home to the courtyard, because again, the home is individual domain for every single person. Chatzar is ultimately a common area, and then we have to make an eruv so that everyone could carry from their house to the courtyard. You could use this dough to go ahead and use for the eruv. Umishtatvan ba, which shituv is very similar to eruv. It's just that shituv is called for a mavoi, which that's like an alleyway, which all the courtyards open up into that side street, because all the courtyards in Talmudic times were in front of the homes, and you go out through the chatzar, you go either into the Rosh Hashanah or into the Mavoi, so that just shearing all the chatzeros together is called shituv mavais. Here you could use this bread also. And you also make a bracha ha'maitzi, let's have three people eating together. You can make zimun on this isas kalavim. And if it's b'yom tov, it can be baked on yom tov, because ultimately the shepherds will eat from it. And a person can even fill his obligation on matzah on Pesach, the first night, which is a mitzvah to eat matzah, like it says be'erev techel matzahs, because the other days of Pesach, if you want to eat other things without bread, you could, but you can fill your obligation on matzah on the Seder night with this isikla. Okay, that is the mission of the Masechet Chala. But says the Gemara, but v'amai, why could it be baked on Yom Tov? What says? Even if the shepherds are going to eat from it, but the dogs also going to eat from it. So why are you allowed to bake this dough? You should have to separate it when you're kneading it, just like you told me the svara, by eat the dough that's half Jewish and half not Jewish, that we said you can't bake it, you gotta separate it. Here also, why you let it bake the isis klavim? You should have to separate what the dogs are going to eat. So it's like, shan isis klavim. The dough of the dogs are different. Hoil ve'efshel afaisin ben avela. That you could appease the dogs with a dead animal. So it comes out that technically the shepherds could eat the whole thing. And since they could eat the whole thing, so even if they're not going to eat from the whole thing, but since they could, so then you could make the whole thing. Because if you wanted to, you possibly would be able to be mafayis, the dog with giving it, throwing it a bone like they call it, and not giving it from the dough. Therefore, it's not a problem. But the non-Jew is his portion. That's his portion. But says the Gemara, Rav Chizda Hoyel. This is Rav Chizda's halacha, who we had asked on and who we're answering for. Does he hold of Hoyel? Because, as Rashi says, at the end of the day, you will be giving the dogs from the dough, because you don't have an avela. It's only because you're relying on Hoyel. Since if I had a dead animal, I would be able to throw him that dead carcass and I wouldn't have to give him the dough. So because of Hoyel, you're permitting it. But V'imma, we learned that Rav Chizda doesn't hold of Hoyel. Someone baked from Yom Tov to the weekday, which as Rashi points out, meaning it's talking about where he already had his meal, and only after his meals that he had for Yom Tov he baked. Where most definitely it's for the weekday. So if someone violated the Isra of baking, which you're not allowed to do if it's not Eichel Nefesh, meaning for the weekday, if Chizda Malek, he gets lashes. What's nice? Oivan, the Lesasik Malocha, get lashes. Rabbi like he says, it doesn't get lashes. Why? So the Gemara explains. If Chizda Malek says he gets lashes because Lo Yamin Hoyel, Umekalele Orchim Chazav. Don't say, since if guests would have came 10 minutes before Shkia, if someone comes running to your house, can't open that place. If guests are going to come, it's me fit for him. No, there's no guest over here, but Hoyel, since if guests would come, be fit. Hashanami Chazalei, here also it'd be fit for him. He doesn't hold to this svar, and then you're going to get lashes. Rabbi, he says, no, you don't get lashes. I would say Hoyel. Since if it would, so then you could, so now you should. It's all going to be, you're allowed to. But one thing is, how are you saying by Easter Club, you're allowed to bake the whole thing, Hoyel, since if you had a dead animal, but you don't have one. Says Ella loy tema Hoyel b'afshad. Don't say since it's possible if you had one, only get the nevela. El going to Isla nevela. We're talking about where you got the dead animal. You could appease the dog with the nevela. You don't have to give him from the dough. So even if you give him from the dough, but it's your dough, you're allowed to bake the whole thing, and it's dissimilar than the case of the chatzi of Yisrael and chatzi of the Nachri, because you gotta give it to him because it's his, and therefore you can't bake the whole thing. Now, related, the Gemara says, they asked from Rav Huna the following question. The Jews who live in the villages, what's unique about them? The king imposed upon the people from the villages to bake and to cook for his armies who fight his wars. The question is, what's halacha? Are you allowed to bake the food for the soldiers on Yom Tov? So Amalahu, he said to them, Chazina, let's see. It depends on the criterion. What does it depend on? And this is the way Rashi explains it, not like Taisus. If you would give the bread to a child instead of a soldier, and he wouldn't be particular, well, then technically you could say that every single bread that you're baking, although you're doing it for the soldiers, but even if you baked of him, you could give it to a child, which you're allowed to bake for your child on Yom Tov. So if it's permitted, which Rashi, also only the way he explains it, he says, Tais disagrees on this too, that Rav Huna disagrees with Rav Chizda. Chizda said before that when it's half a Nachri and half Yisrael, you're not allowed to bake it. Rashi's learning that Rav Huna is disagreeing with that, which Tais disagrees with Rashi saying it, and Tais has a different interpretation, but that's how Rashi says that, they're disagreeing, because according to Rav Chizda, it would be forbidden, because ultimately it's definitely partly a nachriz, so how are you allowed to go ahead and give it to the and bake it on Yom Tov? But either way, he says you're allowed to, because you could give it to the child and be allowed. But if not, let's say they'd be particular and whatever is theirs, they wouldn't let you give it to the child. So also it's forbidden because you're making it specially for these non-Jewish soldiers. That's forbidden to be done on Yom Tov. The problem is they asked Rav Huna about Tanya. We learned in a Beitzah that says that Ma'aseh b'Shimon HaTimni. There was a story with Shimon HaTimni, meaning he was from Timnas, that's what's called Shimon HaTimni. He didn't come the previous day, meaning the night of Yom Tov. So B'Shachris, Yom Tov in the morning, Matzah B'Yud Ben Baba saw him, and Amalei said to him, why didn't you come yesterday to the Beis HaMedrash? Besides, why didn't you come last night to Shul? Amalei says, "Oh, you don't know what happened." Baleshas Bali Reinu. Baleshas had these large armies of these bandits, of these Gentiles, that they search and they Baleshas, a term of like looting. They came to our city. Big shalachtav is kolei. They wanted to grab away the whole city. So what we do? We appease them. We said, misters, says, here, we're going to give you food, sit down over here. They slaughtered calves for them and they gave them to eat. They let us go peacefully. They didn't loot the whole city. So Malois, he said to him, I wonder, if you didn't lose the profit that you gained with your money that you saved, that it should be lost, and your loss because of the punishment that you're going to get for Chil Yamtiv. How could you have done this? That you shechted a calf for them. The Torah says lochem, that you could do a nefesh, but v'lo lev the kavim, not for idol worshippers, not for Gentiles. That's the story. So now the Gemara is asking Rav Huna, Bavamai, what was the problem that they did? What do you mean? Everything that they shechted for those bandits, they could have eaten themselves, and they wouldn't be particular because it was the Jews' food. So what was his complaint? According to Rav Huna, that you're telling me that regarding these villagers, that if they could take the breads for the soldiers and give it to their kids, then you're allowed to make it for the soldiers. So why is he all upset over here on Shimon Timni that he shechted for the soldiers, for those looters? Definitely it's like Gara. They could make it for themselves. They could take it for themselves. So Rabbi Yisrael says no. They couldn't take it for themselves. It was a calf that they shechted for them was a treifa, had a moral defect. A moral defect you can't eat, so you couldn't have taken it for yourself. That's why he had a problem with what he was doing. That it was b'chal yamtiv. But says the Gemara v'chazal klavim. But it's fit to be made for the dogs. So the Gemara Tanoi, it's actually machlekes Tanoim. There is a Tana that holds that you're not allowed to make it for dogs, and that's why he had a problem with Shimon Timni. But it's not difficult in Rav Huna. If it would be ra'u, if it would be fit, if it would be a kosher animal, most definitely Rav Huna is correct that since you could take it for yourself, then there's no isser of making it for the non-Jew, just like he said for the villagers regarding the bread that they were baking, that you could make it on Yom Tov because you could take it for yourself. What's this machlekes regarding the dogs? It's kind of like learning a price. Pasuk says in Shemais, Ach asher ya'ochel chol nefesh. However, everything that's going to be made, that's eaten for every soul, that's very important. What does l'chol nefesh mean? Hu levad yoschem, that you could go ahead and do on Melocha on Yom Tov. Now, says the Beitzah Daf shenem l'chol nefesh. From the wording of that, it says Ach asher ya'ochel chol nefesh. Shemani, I say any nefesh. If a nefesh behema mashma. A behema also says a nefesh. How do I know that? There's a pasuk in the Torah that says umaki nefesh behema. Someone hits the soul of an animal. Yishalmenu, you have to pay for that loss. So that's also called nefesh. So I would think to say that you could make food for animals also on Yom Tov. So malay lechem, that's a pasuk teaches lechem as a getindam and days, which tells you lechem malay leklav. It's only for you and not for dogs. You need a special niyut of lechem to exclude dogs that to be rizik lili. Akiva says no. That's what we're showing. It's a machlekes tanoim. If you're allowed to make food for the dogs, which was that case of the treifa animal, which when you were shechting it, you can't do it for the kutim, but it's a machlekes if you could do it for the dogs, which was possibly the machlekes they had, which Shimon Timni was. He says afil nefesh behem mashma. Same came out lechem. So what does lechem? Doesn't lechem mean for you and not for the dogs? No, lechem means below love the and not for the non-Jews, for the idol worshippers. So the question is, where do you see fit to include that you could do malacha b'chal nefesh for the dogs, and exclude a human being, a non-Jew? Says the Gemara, it's not discrimination. It's just marban club. The reason I'm going to include a dog is your dog. I might development all these dogs going around. Whose responsibility? Clean up after your own dog. Yeah, you have to feed your dog. I'm excluding the idol worship. It's not your responsibility to feed him. Yes, we have Darchei Shalom, we have poor people, but in general, idol worship, it's not your responsibility. And therefore, that's what it's excluding. So, Akapanim, we see machlekes tanoim if you're allowed to make food for the dogs, and therefore, a treifa animal is going to be a problem according to the one that says it's usher, and that was the question I had with Shimon Timni. But again, that's not a difficulty under Rav Huna, because if it would have been an animal that was a kosher animal that they slaughtered, they wouldn't have been upset. Shimon Timni says, oh, yotza scharchem behafsadchem, they wouldn't have lost anything because you're allowed to go and make it because you could have given it to your child. And just like over there where he said that you could give the dough to your child, you can make it for the soldiers. Now, Amalei Abayla of Yosef, he goes back to one of the top line of this Amid, one of the opinions we just said. He has a question based on that. He says, well, Rabbi Yosef, according to Rabbi Yosef, that Rabbi Glili, that we said, he learns, he's that time that says that you could do Eichel Nefesh only for yourself and not for the dogs, in contrast to Rabbi Kiva who says you could do for the dogs. So then Hani Sufli, so he says regarding these date pits, Lechevasa for the animals, how is it possible that we're allowed to go ahead and give it to the dogs on Yom Tiv because it's not fit for human consumption, and you're telling me you cannot do malacha for animals, so it's muktzah. So how are we allowed to go ahead and throw them away on Yom Tiv? So Malay said to him, he says that the date pits do have human purposes because you could use it as fuel. That's why it's not muktzah. But he says tinech be'abesh, that's very good by dried pits. But it's tifta ma'iklavim, but it's moist, it's wet, it's not going to burn. What are you going to say over there? Malay says chazal has a gadol. It is. It's fit for a large bonfire, which even when it's wet, it's going to burn. But it says tinech be'yamtiv. That's very good on yamtiv that you can move the pits because of that. But Shabbos ma'iklavim, what are you going to say on Shabbos? Shabbos you can't make a fire. So what's the utility if you tell me you can't use it for animals? If you hold that it's not muktzah for animals, so I understand by Yom Tov Akapanim. But by Shabbos, what are you going to say? Says the Gemara Mataltalino al Agad. Right, Shabbos you can't just move the pits. It's muktzah. You can move it through a piece of bread. Kedishmul. Because Amar Shmuel says a person could do all his needs with a piece of bread, meaning it's not considered what's called bizu eichlin, disgracing the food, and you can move the pits through the bread. That's how it's moved. But you're right, you can't just move it on Shabbos, and even in Yom Tov we have to say it has some other utility because, again, according to basically it's lachem, v'lo l'klav. And the Gemara points out that this teaching of Rav Huna that we mentioned before, that said that if you could give the bread to the child, then even though you're making for the non-Jewish soldier, you could bake them all because technically you could give it to your child and it wouldn't be makbid, and so consider eichel nefesh. So the Gemara upliged Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, but that disagrees with Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says he disagrees in halacha. He says, and this is actually a very important halacha. It's halacha lamaisa. You're allowed to invite a Gentile. Sometimes you have neighbors, whatever, the officer or whoever it is. You invite a guest for a Shabbos. But the aim is on Esanacha b'Yom Tov. Now invite a non-Jew for a Yom Tov meal. Interesting, right? You would think the other way around. Shabbos is Mochamer. Yom Tov, no. Yom Tov you can't invite the Gentile. Why? It's a rabbinic concern that you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. So you're putting out some schnitzel in this night to say, oh, Officer Constanza came, put on another one for him. Oh, that's you're doing malacha. You're not just doing malacha eichel nefesh. But it's lachem v'loy la'evdi kachavim. And therefore, you're not allowed to invite the Gentile. You might add on more. Now, that's not like Rav Huna. Why isn't that like Rav Huna? Because Rav Huna said, it's your food. You're making for Officer Constanza. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and eat it. Give it to your kid. Oh, obviously it's not like Rav Huna, but since you're making it for him, so therefore that's going to be awesome. Now, Rav Me'agam, he says, he says, no, you can't even invite a guest of a Gentile, even on Shabbos. Why not? The reason is shiur kaisis. You run into a different problem. What happens is you're going to give a cup of wine to the Gentile to drink. He's going to have, the way they did in Talmudic times, they would dip their bread into the wine, and it's going to have the leftovers of that bread in the cup. And the shamish, who is a Jew, is going to put away the kais, but he can't because of the muktzah of the leftovers in the cup from the Gentile. So because of that problem, you can't invite the guy for a Shabbos meal. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, didanami. What do you mean? What's husband with a guy? What do you mean? I was also, it's not fit for anything. It's disgusting. Someone's leftover bread in the cup of wine. So what's the difference? The Gemara, no, didan chazatan. I was used with the chickens. Everyone had their cows and the chickens, and some people still want to live on the farm, right? So you had your chickens and you give it to the chickens. So it has utility. It's not muktzah. He says, but did you never chazatan? It was husband with the guy. So his also you can give to the chickens. And no, did who isur? No. Theirs are yayin nesach, because they drank the wine. That's forbidden to benefit. That's muktzah. So if you can invite a Gentile for a Shabbos Suda either. Says, wait a second, you're bringing halachas of muktzah because of the wine is isur hana, v'lotaltlinu agav kasa. But why can't I move the leftovers in the cup because of the cup? Mila Marava, didn't Rabbi say mitaltlin kanunam? You can move a kanuna. What's a kanuna? It's a vessel that they would put in coals. Why are you allowed to move it? Agav kitne, because of the ashes. Meaning, we need the ashes, which were prepared from before Shabbos, because in Talmudic times, people would spit on the floor, or the children would relieve themselves, whatever it is. They needed the ashes. So, avagav dikala shari'etzim, although they are broken pieces of wood which are not useful, they're just muktzah wood, is in that pot, you're allowed to move it with the kanuna, which actually takes us like a few different pshatim to explain exactly, which are very interesting interpretations with the halachas of muktzah, because of buses. Taisa discusses exactly what's the comparison, because they're very different halachas. These cases, because here by the cup, which has something forbidden to move, so Taisa says that should be forbidden to move. In contrast, by the ashes, which has utility, so it has a different halacha, it has something useful inside of it. Meaning, basis ladava asa ladava muta, you have the ashes inside that has utility. Here, the cup, how are you allowed to move the cup because of what's inside? So Taisa says they both have chadl tibus v'chadl reyesa. Here, the cup, you let him move it, but what's inside is asa. By the kanuna, it says what's inside is muta, but it says the kanuna itself actually is asa to move because it's kli shemalach le'esa. So it says also a few different pshatim, but akapanim, the Gemara is comparing the two of them and saying that, there's a problem, and yet you're allowed to move it because of what is permitted. Here also, the cup is permitted to be moved, so because of the shiur cases, why should that stop you from moving it? Says the Gemara, no, there are different levels of category of problems. There, by the kinuna, even the mukta item is not forbidden to benefit from it. Here, the leftovers in the cup of the guy is isur hana. So Rashi explains muktzah and tfei. Interesting. There's like levels of muktzah. It's more set aside because you can't even have hana from it, and therefore it would be more of a problem about moving, and that's why you cannot. And might, according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, a guy even on Shabbos. But the Gemara still has a problem with this because Amalei Rav Acha Madif Ravin, it says even if you say it's very very muktzah, but we'll have a kagrav sharei. Why is it going to be any less than what's called a bucket of excrement, which is the halacha is that you let him move and clear out to the garbage dump, something that's disgusting. As the Gemara says in the last paragraph of Lamivav Mabez. So here we have this leftover bread and the wine and the table. It's disgusting. So why shouldn't you be able to move it? So even if it's muktzah, but Grav Sharei is ahead to move muktzah. So Malay said to him, hey, you're right. You think you're allowed to go ahead and make a Grav Sharei? That although if you have something disgusting in front of you, you're allowed to move it, but to make it and bring it, or for us to go there so that it should be disgusting and to move it, do you think that's permitted? That's not permitted, which actually there's famous shmuzin regarding that. Let's say here someone has drip and whatever, and he brings his bed there and it's bothering him. They said that you can't make a Grav Sharei, and therefore you can't invite the Gentile because you're going to be making a Grav Sharei. And since it's being muktzah, you're not going to move it. Therefore, that's why you're not allowed to invite the guy, even on Shabbos. Now the Gemara brings a story to illustrate this halacha. The Adbere Drava Lamar Shmuel B'Darish, which Rabbah was walking with the Master Shmuel, and he was darshaning to him like this. It said, "Mezamnin nesanachi b'Shabbos." It says you're allowed to invite a guy on Shabbos. But ve'im mezamnin nesanachi b'Yom Tov, which was like the prior opinion of Rabbi Shloimy Levi, you cannot invite a guy on Yom Tov gzer shemiyab b'shvilot. Because again, you might come to put on more food, more steaks on the grill for the guy on Yom Tov, which is going to be asur. Which we said is not like Rav Huna from Amud Aleph, who says it's not a problem. Now, but Merema Mazutra, the Gemara brings the Kiava Mikla Lahu Nachar b'Yom Tov. If let's say in the middle of the Yom Tov meal, and the neighbor Steve comes over on Yom Tov, Amr Lady would tell him like this, Steve, like this. Inichalach b'may detricha lon. The word lon is important. If you're okay with what we already put in an effort for ourselves, I mean, we made food, halabchas, this and that. If you're okay with what we made for ourselves, mutif, fine, you can come and sit down. But if not, we're not going to be putting in more effort for you, where some Mefarshim explain because the whole problem is the inviting. Not let it invite. If it comes over, then he could come, but we're not going to do it for you because you're not allowed to be marba for the guy because it says lachem, v'lo lekutim, and if they would say like that to the neighbor, says, look, if you want to sit down, come and sit, but we're not going to be making anything special for you on Yom Tov. Tin halacha, the next Mishnah, again continuing on a machlekes of Beisham and Basil, which is this whole Masechta up until now has been having machlekes Beisham and Basil in the laws of Yom Tov. So this is also a classic halacha regarding showering, bathing on Yom Tov. Beisham says, a person is not allowed to heat up hot water for his feet, meaning to wash his feet, because oichel nefesh is what the pasuk permitted, not to go ahead and light a fire because of bathing. So therefore, Bisham says not heat up water to wash your feet. Okay, it's fit for drinking. Okay, that's oichel nefesh. Then you could use that water for washing your feet. Basil Matir Basil holds that it's permitted to heat up the water for washing one's feet. Additionally, says the Mishnah, a person is allowed to make a large fire, and he's allowed to heat himself up by the bonfire on Yom Tov. Now, the following question, this last halacha, Hai Madura, meaning we had first a machlekes b'sham Basil regarding heating up water for the feet, and then we had a halacha regarding the Madura. So the Gemara is asking, this halacha of the Madura, of the bonfire that's permitted, Man Kitanila, who said this halacha, as the Gemara explains? Is it Divrei HaKali? Is this everyone unanimous? And if it's everyone, then obviously Bishami Lulu Bishami Ben Ano is called Gufa, so Bishami must be differentiated between a benefit of pleasure that your whole body gets, which is by the bonfire, and as Rashi explains, that would be similar to Eichel Nefesh. When you eat, your whole body gets energy, as everyone just had last night, suddenly you get your whole thing. So a bonfire is Hanois called Gufa. Bisham would agree you're allowed to. In contrast to just washing one limb, meaning 3 legs, that would be Aser. Maybe no, maybe it was Beis Hill who said it. Bisham would not differentiate. He says, no, it's not a Nefesh. It's not for eating purposes. It's not a gastronomical delight, and therefore, although it's Hanois called Gufa, it would not be permitted. So when the Tashmas being right, it's clear. A Bryce says, they say, Lo Yasa Ad Madura, Ischam Kenegde, Beis Hill says clearly as only that it was a continuation of Beis Hill's teaching, but Bishami disagrees. Bishami says you're not allowed to make even the Madura on Yom Tov. Now, look at the next Mishnah. Again, which regarding Beishamai on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah, Shleisha Dvarim, there was 3 things, Ramlil Machmer Kedav Beishamai, that the Ramlil was stringent, like the opinion of Beishamai. She doesn't explain what's the reason. The first one was, Ein Taimen Esachamen Leketchila B'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to initially insulate the hot food on Yom Tov for Shabbos. That was halacha number 1. And halacha number 2 was ve'ein zeikfines menorah b'Yom Tov. Now go ahead and stand up the menorah on Yom Tov, which sounds like that if a metal menorah fell down, you just can't straighten it up and put it back up, which the Gemara will explain ultimately, but that's what it sounds like. And the third halacha is ve'ein oifen piten geritzen, that you're not allowed to bake thick loaves because of the tircha. We know tircha is forbidden, Shabbos Yom Tov. Ella rikikin, has to be thin, wafer-like doughs. That's the 3 things. Now, Amram Gamliel said, "Mimein shel beis Abba," says, from all the days of my father's household, lahoya oifen pitin geritzen. Yeah, like Gamliel, that's one of the 3 things that he was machmir. He said regarding his the tata at keton, says, but they never made these thick breads. Ella rikikin, only thin-like ones. So Amalei, they said to him, what are we going to do for your father's household? Yeah, they would be stringent on themselves, like you just said, but they actually was lenient for the whole Jewish people. These oifen piten geritzen, they actually made the thick, they let everyone use the thick breads, and those even that they would bake on coals, which is a tircha, and still they permitted that. So again, the fact that your tata did like this, but your father actually let everyone else do it on the regular types of doughs. Now the Gemara asks on this first halacha regarding that we said of ein toinen. So heichadami, what's the case talk about? As the Gemara explains, if you already made erev tavshilin from before Yom Tov, so my time is Beishamai. What would be there in the Beishamai that you can't do hatmana? What I mean, that's the whole purpose of doing erev tavshilin. You're allowed to bake, cook. You're allowed to do Beishamai agrees to the halacha of erev tavshilin. And we eat lo yom erev tavshilin, and if they didn't leave erev tavshilin, so my time is Beis Hill. So why would Beis Hill hold that you're allowed to go ahead and do that if Beis also agrees you can't do Hatmana or Bishul or Afiyah if you didn't make Erev Tavshin from before Yom Tov. So how do we understand this halacha? Says the Gemara, Amr Rav Huna says, La'olam Emlach, truthfully I'll tell you, Shleini Erev Tavshin. We're talking about where that no Erev Tavshin was left, and still it's not difficult in Beis Hillel. No Erev Tavshin, how are you allowed to do Hatmana according to Beis Hillel? Because the Kedei Chayev Shor L'Rabbana. If it's enough to support himself just to live, the Rabbanan actually let you make the food without Erev Tavshin. But Rav Huna, because this is Rav Huna according to his reasoning. Because Rav Huna says, Mishleini Erev Tavshin. Some did not make Erev Tavshin. Oifenli Pasachas, which the Mefarshim are Medayik, is it's only other people, because it sounds like they could do for him, or he could also do it. But even as an A, Oifenli Pasachas, they'll allow to make from one bread. They could cook from one pot, as you could think about Beis and Aleph. They'll allow light from a candle. His basics, we're allowed to do for him, and therefore that is where we're saying he's like Beis Shammai, but Beis Hillel actually would hold it would be permitted, yes, even without an Erev Tavshin. I'm sure Bitzah will come in and Bitzah said, after like cotton, you could even roast him, roast a small fish. Something like the Beitzah. Mishlei Erev Tavshin, someone does not leave Erev Tavshin. You could bake from one bread, you could insulate from one pot, and you could light from the candle, you could warm up for him one flask. And some say after something like that cotton, you could even roast for him a small fish. And we'll continue with the next daf regarding other approaches for the answer to explain this first halacha. But that was answer number one in regards to this question about what is this really being machlek b'shamai. What would be the machlekes if you could be hatmani? Either you did Erev Tavshin or not. So for answer number one, the Gemara is saying is that yes, there's no Erev Tavshin, but Rav Huna L'Shitas holds that Beis Hillel would hold that you could do Kedei Chayev, and that's what we're saying that Rav Huna did like Beis Shammai. Thank you to any time.